July 11th, 1943, 2200 hours, over the Mediterranean Sea. Lieutenant Colonel Ruben Tucker stood at the open door of his C-47 Skytrain, one gloved hand gripping the cold metal frame as wind tore past the fuselage. Below him, the Mediterranean was invisible, an endless black void reflecting no moonlight, offering no sense of distance, no reassurance of safety. Ahead, the southern coast of Sicily loomed somewhere beyond the darkness. Then the sky exploded. Tracer rounds arced upward from the Allied fleet below, rising in graceful, terrifying curves like fireworks launched by unseen hands. Orange blossoms of exploding 40mm shells burst at altitude, tearing holes through the night. The thunder of anti-aircraft fire rolled across the water in overlapping waves, a continuous roar that vibrated through the aircraft's skin. Every gun was firing, every ship, every battery. They were firing at him. Tucker looked out into the chaos and understood instantly what was happening. The gunners below believed they were under attack. 15 minutes earlier, German bombers had struck the invasion fleet. The ship's crews were still at battle stations, nerves frayed, fingers tight on triggers. Now they saw aircraft silhouettes approaching out of the dark. They fired first. Tucker's aircraft was one of 144 C-47 transports, carrying the paratroopers of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. Inside the plane, the men sat on narrow benches lining the fuselage, knees touching, shoulders pressed together, burdened with nearly 70 pounds of equipment each. Rifles, ammunition, grenades, radios, rations. They had trained for this jump for months. They knew the plan. They knew their objectives. Secure the beachhead. Protect the landing zones. Link up with amphibious forces at dawn. This was supposed to be routine. The radio operator's voice suddenly broke through the intercom, raw with panic. "We are American paratroopers. Stop firing! Stop firing!" The message went out on the correct frequency. The words were clear, the desperation unmistakable. It didn't matter. Coordination between services had failed. Many of the ships below had never been informed that friendly transport aircraft would be passing overhead. Others received incomplete or delayed notifications. Some received nothing at all. From the perspective of the gunners, this was simple. Enemy aircraft had attacked moments earlier. Now more planes were approaching. Hesitation could mean death. So they fired. Within minutes, the night turned into slaughter. A C-47 flying off Tucker's left wing took a direct hit. The transport erupted in midair, its fuselage disintegrating into a fireball that tumbled toward the sea, fragments trailing flame behind it. Another aircraft, struck repeatedly, began to burn. Its pilot fought the controls as one engine failed, then another. The plane fell out of formation, spiraling downward. Pilots shouted into radios that no one could hear. Formations broke apart. Aircraft scattered, climbed, descended, turned blindly in all directions. Some crews tried to push through the wall of fire towards Sicily. Others attempted emergency ditchings in the Mediterranean, hoping to save the men inside. Few succeeded. Inside the stricken aircraft, paratroopers faced choices no human being should ever have to make. Stay with the burning plane and die when it hit the water. Or jump into total darkness over the sea, weighed down by equipment almost guaranteed to drag them under. Some jumped anyway. Men hurled themselves out of flaming aircraft, parachutes snapping open over empty water. They hit the sea hard, immediately pulled under by the weight of their gear. A few managed to cut themselves free, shedding rifles, packs, radios, everything that tied them to survival as soldiers. Most never resurfaced. Others jumped over land, but their nightmare wasn't over. As they drifted downward beneath white parachutes, Allied anti-aircraft guns on the beaches tracked them. Gunners, unable to distinguish friend from foe, fired at the descending figures. Men were shot while hanging helplessly in the air, bullets ripping through fabric and flesh alike. Paratroopers died before they ever touched the ground. The massacre lasted less than 20 minutes. When it was over, 23 C-47s had been shot down. 37 more were so badly damaged they would never fly combat missions again. 81 men were dead. 318 were wounded. Among the dead was the assistant division commander to Brigadier General Charles Kierans, killed when his transport was destroyed. Senior leadership lost, not to enemy action, but to friendly fire. Lieutenant Colonel Tucker survived. His aircraft somehow made it through the gauntlet. He jumped with his remaining men and fought through the night to secure his objectives. But when dawn broke over Sicily, the horror became undeniable. Tucker stood on blood-soaked sand. The Sicily scenario would repeat itself, on a much larger scale. A solution had to meet strict criteria. It had to be immediately recognizable. It had to be visible at night and at dawn. It had to work at high speed. It had to require no electronics. It had to be applied quickly and cheaply. And it had to be impossible to confuse with German markings. Complicated systems were rejected first. Colored lights? Too subtle. Flares? Too slow. Electronic transponders? Too unreliable. The answer, when it came, was brutally simple. Paint. The idea was not entirely new. In earlier conflicts, aircraft had carried high visibility markings to prevent friendly fire, but nothing had ever been attempted at the scale now required. The proposal was stark. Bold black and white stripes painted directly onto aircraft wings and fuselages. No curves, no insignia, no national markings that could be confused or obscured. Just raw contrast, at speed, at distance, at dawn. Black and white could not be mistaken. Not everyone supported the idea. Some officers worried about visibility to the enemy. Others argued that painting aircraft days before an invasion would risk leaks. Still others balked at the sheer logistics of painting thousands of aircraft on short notice. Fighter pilots complained that the stripes would make them obvious targets. Bomber crews worried about friendly gunners mistaking them for something else entirely. But Sicily hung over every meeting like a ghost. When skeptics argued that friendly fire incidents were rare, the numbers ended the discussion. 81 dead, 300 wounded, no enemy involved. That reality crushed opposition. Limited trials were conducted in Britain. Aircraft were painted with broad stripes and flown past anti-aircraft batteries at various speeds and altitudes. The results were immediate. Gunners identified the aircraft correctly almost instantly. Even inexperienced crews reacted faster. Even under simulated combat stress. Black and white did what training and radios could not. It cut through fear. In early 1944, the order was approved. All Allied tactical aircraft participating in the invasion of France would receive invasion stripes. The order specified exact dimensions, exact placement, exact spacing. There would be no variation, no interpretation. Uniformity was the point. The timing was ruthless. Aircraft could not be painted too early or German reconnaissance would notice. They could not be painted too late, or mistakes would creep in. The final order went out just days before D-Day. Across southern England, airfields exploded into frantic activity. Ground crews worked through the night. Buckets of paint were mixed by hand. Brushes replaced spray guns in many cases due to time pressure. There was no masking tape, no finesse, no artistry, just speed. Stripes were slapped onto wings and fuselages in uneven strokes. Some were crooked, some were wider than regulation, some bled into roundels. No one cared. Perfection was irrelevant. Visibility was everything. On the evening of June 5th, 1944, airfields across England were lined with aircraft that looked unlike anything the world had ever seen. C-47 transports, Typhoons, Spitfires, Mustangs, all marked with stark black and white bands. Pilots walked their aircraft, running hands over still tacky paint. Paratroopers boarded planes beneath wings that looked almost unfinished. No one joked about the stripes. They all knew why they were there. They remembered Sicily. As the invasion began, thousands of aircraft lifted into the dark sky and headed toward France. Below them, the largest fleet in history waited, and this time, the guns stayed silent. Naval gunners watched the skies, hearts pounding, fingers tense on triggers. But when they saw the stripes, recognition was immediate. Friendly, let them pass. D-Day was not bloodless. Far from it. But one catastrophe did not repeat itself. No mass friendly fire shootdowns. No transports torn apart by Allied guns. No paratroopers slaughtered in the sky. The simple act of painting stripes had worked. The invasion moved forward, and a lesson was carved into military history. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest one. June 6th, 1944. 0000 to 0600 hours. Over the English Channel and Normandy. The sky over the channel filled with aircraft in numbers never before seen in human history. C-47s flew in long, staggered formations, their engines droning in a steady, relentless rhythm. Gliders followed behind on tow cables, dark shapes barely visible against the night sky. Fighters weaved above and below them, guarding the slow-moving transports from German interception. Every one of them carried the same stark markings: 5 black stripes, 5 white stripes, painted hastily, unevenly, imperfectly, and unmistakably Allied. June 6th, 1944. 0000 to 0600 hours. Over the English Channel and Normandy. The sky over the channel filled with aircraft in numbers never before seen in human history. C-47Es flew in long, staggered formations, their engines droning in a steady, relentless rhythm. Gliders followed behind on tow cables, dark shapes barely visible against the night sky. Fighters weaved above and below them, guarding the slow-moving transports from German interception. Every one of them carried the same stark markings: 5 black stripes, 5 white stripes, painted hastily, unevenly, imperfectly, and unmistakably Allied. On the decks of destroyers and battleships, anti-aircraft crews stood ready. Sicily had burned itself into their memories. No one wanted to relive that night. As the first aircraft crossed overhead, silhouettes emerged from the darkness. Then the stripes appeared. Bold, high contrast, impossible to miss. Orders passed instantly down the line. Friendly aircraft, hold fire. Not a single gun opened up. For the first time in a massive airborne operation, recognition was immediate and universal. The chaos that had doomed Sicily simply did not materialize. The solution worked. Inside the transports, paratroopers felt the difference even if they didn't fully understand it. No tracer fire rose toward them, no sudden evasive maneuvers, no aircraft exploding nearby. Green jump lights flicked on, doors opened, men stepped into the dark. They descended into Normandy, scattered, but alive. Some landed miles from their objectives, others dropped directly into German positions. But they landed as trained soldiers, not victims of friendly fire. The stripes had done their job. As daylight broke, the scale of the invasion became visible. Aircraft streaked low over beaches packed with landing craft. Fighters dove inland to strafe German positions. Bombers passed overhead in waves. Again and again, naval gunners tracked aircraft through their sights, then relaxed when the stripes filled their view. No hesitation, no doubt. The black and white bands cut through smoke, haze, and confusion better than any insignia ever had. Nowhere was the impact greater than in close air support. RAF Typhoons roared in at treetop height, firing rockets into German armored columns, rushing toward the beaches. These were exactly the kind of aircraft that had been mistaken for enemy fighters before. But now, the stripes flashed past gun positions at terrifying speed. British. Friendly. The coordination between air and ground forces reached a level that had been impossible just a year earlier. Pilots attacked aggressively, knowing they would not be engaged by their own side. Gunners held fire with confidence. The psychological effect was profound. Fear had been replaced by clarity. German troops noticed the stripes almost immediately. Reports from Wehrmacht units described Allied aircraft with unusual markings dominating the skies. Luftwaffe pilots, already vastly outnumbered, struggled to identify targets quickly enough to engage. The stripes, designed to prevent friendly fire, had an unintended secondary effect. They emphasized Allied air supremacy. German anti-aircraft gunners hesitated, not because they couldn't identify the aircraft, but because there were simply too many of them. By mid-morning, the air war over Normandy was effectively decided. Officers who had survived Operation Husky could hardly believe the difference. One staff officer reportedly remarked, "It's the same operation, just without the disaster." The comparison was stark. Same type of aircraft, same gunners, same stress, different markings. The lesson was undeniable. Within days, invasion stripes were recognized as one of the most effective identification measures ever implemented. Orders were issued to extend their use beyond initial assault aircraft. Tactical aircraft operating over France continued to wear them. Transport aircraft kept them for months. The Allies had learned something fundamental. Identification had to be visual, immediate, and idiot-proof. If it required thought, it failed. The stripes were not without issues. Pilots reported that the high-contrast markings made them more visible to German gunners. Some fighter units requested permission to reduce or remove them once air superiority was secure. By late June 1944, partial removals were authorized. Upper wing stripes were removed first, then fuselage stripes, leaving only underwing markings in some units. The balance shifted from preventing friendly fire to minimizing enemy visibility. But the principle remained intact. The stripes had served their purpose at the moment they were needed most. Unlike dramatic weapons or famous commanders, invasion stripes rarely appear in headlines. There was no single battle where they won the day. Instead, they prevented a disaster that never happened. No headlines announced catastrophes avoided, but veterans knew. Naval gunners knew, pilots knew, paratroopers knew. The black and white stripes had saved lives. D-Day proved that modern warfare required solutions that acknowledged human limitations: fear, stress, fatigue, split-second decisions. Technology could help, but only if it worked within those limits. Paint worked because it respected reality. As Allied forces pushed inland, the need for invasion stripes diminished. Air superiority was complete. Coordination improved. Threats changed. But the lesson endured. Visual identification would remain a core principle in military aviation. High visibility markings, recognition panels, infrared identifiers, each owed something to the brutal clarity of those stripes over Normandy. In less than a year, the Allies had gone from shooting down their own aircraft in panic to executing the most complex airborne operation in history with minimal friendly fire losses. The difference wasn't courage, or training, or discipline. It was understanding. Understanding that in war, simplicity saves lives. By the summer of 1944, the skies over Western Europe had changed. The chaos that defined the early days of the invasion gave way to something closer to control. Allied aircraft flew almost unchallenged. German fighter opposition dwindled daily, starved of fuel, pilots, and spare parts. Anti-aircraft fire still existed, but it was increasingly localized, reactive, and ineffective. And slowly, quietly, the black and white stripes began to disappear. The very thing that made invasion stripes effective also made them dangerous once circumstances changed. They were visible. Too visible. German gunners learned quickly. While the stripes had initially caused confusion, they soon became a targeting aid. Aircraft screaming low over the battlefield, already easy to spot, now stood out even more clearly against the landscape. Pilots noticed it first. Fighter pilots flying Mustangs and Spitfires reported that ground fire seemed more accurate. Typhoon pilots, already vulnerable during rocket attacks, complained that the stripes made them impossible to miss during pullout. The calculus shifted. In the first days of the invasion, preventing friendly fire mattered more than anything else. Weeks later, with Allied air superiority firmly established, survival depended on minimizing visibility to the enemy. So, commanders adapted. There was no single order that erased invasion stripes overnight. Instead, removal happened in stages. Upper wing stripes were removed first, then fuselage stripes. Underwing stripes often remained longest. This staggered approach reflected operational reality. Aircraft most likely to be seen from above, by friendly fighters, could lose stripes sooner. Aircraft operating low, where ground gunners still posed a risk, retained them longer. By the autumn of 1944, most Allied aircraft no longer carried full invasion stripes. Their job was done. Given their success, it might seem logical that invasion stripes would become a permanent feature of military aviation. They didn't, and the reason reveals how warfare evolved. After World War II, aircraft became faster, much faster. Jet aircraft closed distances in seconds. Recognition windows shrank dramatically. Visual identification alone was no longer enough, no matter how bold the markings. Electronics filled the gap. Radar-based IFF systems improved. Transponders became more reliable. Secure communication links allowed real-time identification across vast battle spaces. Invasion stripes worked because they fit the moment. They were a solution to a specific problem at a specific time under specific conditions. That didn't make them obsolete. It made them perfect. What endured was not the paint, but the thinking behind it. Sicily had exposed a truth militaries could no longer ignore. Humans under extreme stress will make mistakes. Systems must be designed around that reality, not against it. This philosophy shaped post-war doctrine. Aircraft identification systems were redesigned with redundancy. No single method would ever again be trusted alone. Visual, electronic, and procedural safeguards layered on top of one another. Modern militaries still teach the Sicily lesson, sometimes without naming it. If identification requires calm thought in chaos, it will fail. Decades later, veterans spoke about the stripes with a mix of relief and quiet gratitude. Paratroopers who jumped into Normandy remembered looking up at painted wings and feeling, if only briefly, safe. Naval gunners remembered holding fire. trusting what they saw instead of reacting in panic. Pilots remembered the confidence of knowing their own side would not shoot them down. None of them talked about the stripes as clever. They talked about them as obvious. That was the point. The tragedy over Sicily rarely appears in popular histories. It lacks a villain. There is no dramatic enemy defeat, no triumphant counterattack, just loss and responsibility. But without that loss, the invasion of Normandy might have unfolded very differently. Friendly fire incidents on the scale of Sicily, repeated over the Channel, could have crippled airborne forces before they ever reached France. The absence of disaster on D-Day is itself evidence of success. History celebrates what happens. It rarely celebrates what doesn't. No one erects monuments to accidents avoided. No medals are given for disasters that never occurred. Yet the invasion stripes represent one of the most successful preventive measures in military history. They saved lives precisely because they prevented stories from existing. Today, modern aircraft still carry echoes of that lesson. High visibility panels during training, distinctive markings for coalition forces, infrared identifiers invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable through sensors. Different tools, same logic, make identification instant, make mistakes unlikely, accept human limits. The black and white stripes over Normandy were not a symbol of technological superiority, they were a symbol of humility. An admission that even the most powerful military on Earth could fail spectacularly if it ignored how humans actually behave under pressure. The Allies learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it in time. War is often remembered through moments of action, the charge, the breakthrough, the explosion. But the most important moments, the ones that decide whether men live or die, often happen long before the first shot is fired. In planning rooms, briefing tents, and quiet conversations after disasters no one wants to talk about. The story of invasion stripes belongs to that category. It is not a story about victory in the traditional sense. It is a story about responsibility. Friendly fire is not caused by incompetence. It is caused by uncertainty. Every battlefield is saturated with noise, stress, fatigue, fear, and incomplete information. Soldiers are trained to react instantly because hesitation kills. But that same instinct, fire first, verify later, creates the conditions for catastrophe. The tragedy over Sicily was not an anomaly. It was the natural outcome of a system that demanded perfect judgment from exhausted human beings operating under impossible conditions. And the most dangerous lie in warfare is believing that better training alone can fix that. Training helps. Discipline matters. But no amount of instruction can eliminate human limitation. The Allies learned this lesson in blood. Before July 1943, friendly fire was treated as an unfortunate but unavoidable cost of combat. After Sicily, it became a solvable problem. Not completely, not perfectly, but measurably. That shift in thinking, away from blame and towards systems, is what made invasion stripes possible. Instead of asking, why did gunners fire? Planners asked, what made firing seem correct? Instead of punishing individuals, they redesigned the environment. That mindset would quietly shape Allied success for the rest of the war. Most of the men whose lives were saved by invasion stripes never knew it. A transport pilot who flew over the Channel and was not fired upon had no way of knowing how close he came to disaster. A paratrooper who jumped cleanly into Normandy never saw the fingers that stayed off triggers below him. A naval gunner who held fire never saw the future he avoided. History does not record near misses, but they happened, thousands of them. One of the most overlooked aspects of friendly fire is what it does to the people who commit it. Veterans who survived Sicily spoke rarely about combat with the enemy. When they did speak, it was often about that night. Because killing the enemy is something war prepares you for. Killing your own is not. The invasion stripes spared not only the lives of pilots and paratroopers, but the consciences of the men who would have shot them down. That matters.